important to think about crowdsourcing and how to explain to folks how it works and why it works. And I do want to acknowledge that, again, this is, these insights are really have come about because we've had just amazing partners over the years working with us, starting with Jeff and Elizabeth and Lynn in the early days, like saying, okay, we'll take a rider with you guys. Yeah, it's not rocket science, but we'll figure it out. And over the years, we've had, again, great partnership from NASA, great partnership from the Harvard Medical School, colleagues at the Broad Institute, and so on, working with us to develop the fact base and this conceptual base along the way. And we've had also been very fortunate to have great funders, folks from the Arnold Foundation, from Schmidt, and so on, helping us as well. So this is really a collective product. So to get us going, here we go. The first thing to note is that this is not a new thing, right? So crowdsourcing, going to the outside world for solutions has been around well before the start of the internet. And it's important to realize that. So before the advent of sort of modern universities and modern companies, remember companies are only 120 years old. In the history of humanity, right? Formal companies like Harvard Business School, right, is 100 years old, and 110 years old. But if you think about like companies forming as a dominant way of organizing human activity, that's only 120 years old, right? Before that, we had governments, right? Governments would organize innovation, would go after solving problems in this way. And one of the main mechanisms that governments use in the 14th century and 15th century, and even prehistory, was to sort of organize a contest, go to the crowd. And probably the most famous one that we know about, that everybody talks about, is what happened with the Brits. And so they lost, to Croatia. That was yesterday. They had a bigger disaster in 1707.
Too soon.
Yeah, Croatia, Croatia, 4 million. That's like the state of Massachusetts is bigger. And so, 1707, the British fleet sinks off the south coast of the UK due to bad navigation. It was basically, they knew that there were bad rocks, but they were in fog, and they got hit bad. And then the British Parliament in 1714 established the Longitude Prize, right? Up to £20,000, so it was big money, right? Even now, you can imagine how much that was worth 300 years ago. And anyone can enter, and you just need a working solution. Sir Isaac Newton was sort of the principal advisor to the Longitude Board. And what he said was that, look, he's a genius, right? Like, he invents calculus, invents gravity, establishes the modern scientific method, right? And his view was that the only way you could find a solution to the problem was by methods of astronomy, right? Because he was an astronomer. So he was focused on saying that the best solution that's going to come is going to come from astronomy. And so he, in many ways, sort of curtailed innovation for some time because that was his main criteria for evaluation. Regardless, as the contest got going, there were quite a few solutions that were proposed. And in fact, here across the river at the college, we have a wonderful history of science department, and they've documented this history really well. So over 100 solutions were proposed to find the longitude at sea. Some were quite novel, so like you could have telepathic dogs that were on your ships, right, and they would bray when you cross a longitude, right? People believed in telepathy at that time. Some still do. Somebody else had a brilliant idea that you could just put cannons out at sea on platforms, right? And you have people on the cannons that they would fire at certain times to indicate the longitude. A very practical solution. And then, of course, the big thing was, can we just build a clock that could keep track of time? So remember 1707, 1714, the Swiss weren't good at clock making yet, right? And so clocks at that time would lose track of time as you would get up to sea because of humidity, motion of the ocean, right, and changes in temperature. So all you needed, if you knew that the theory was, and this basic trigonometry is that if you knew the time at port when you left, and then you knew the exact time you were out at sea, you could then through trigonometry come back to the location you were at, the longitude you were at. But as soon as the ship left the port, right, the clock would lose track of the port time very quickly, and so then you would lose accuracy. Because at noon you could know exactly what time it was, and you could counterbalance that. But the solution came from this guy, John Harrison, right, which was an unknown cabinet maker, right, who basically invented a way to keep track of time through this marine one chronometer. And the reason he had this knowledge was because he understood material science. He understood expansion and contraction of material of all types. Because he's making these fine-fitting cabinets, took that knowledge to this thing and made it work. And in many ways, this is sort of like the canonical way to go to the crowd, right? You have a problem, you define a problem, you establish a price amount, you get lots of solutions. Most solutions are crap, right? And what you care about is a really good solution, right? And then, as we see in our research, is that the winners tend to come like the forensic guy from Rio, right? And he's picked up machine learning himself, right? And he keeps competing and keeps winning in our tough contests. And so this is the framework that we see happen quite a bit. And the reason why we see this mattering is certainly with regards to innovation. What matters, of course, is that when we're innovating, we're at the frontiers of our knowledge. We just face a tremendous degree of uncertainty. Okay? So uncertainty is the hallmark of innovation. If you're going to be pushing the boundaries of knowledge, it hasn't been done before, you're just going to face a lot of uncertainty. And I think the best quote about this was done by Charles Karim. He sort of said, you know, when it comes to R&D, you can't answer any of the questions. You don't know when you're going to get the thing, whether it's going to work or not, when it's going to have any value whatsoever. Okay? So this is the sort of the view that haunts most R&D efforts. And then you, of course, have Joy's Law as well, right? Joy's Law says no matter who you are, most of the smartest people work for someone else, right? And this is really a statement that says that, you know, we imagine companies. If you remember, like in the first internet boom, like we had the smartest 5 people in discipline X. We have the smartest 5 people in discipline Y, right? And we have the monopoly on knowledge or any particular discipline. And that's how we think companies are organized, that we can monopolize knowledge. But Bill Joy's view really was groundbreaking to say that no matter who you are, most of the smartest people work for someone else. Of course, there's an asterisk here, there's a Harvard exception, right? Except for Harvard. Not Harvard. But beyond that, it applies everywhere else. And the reason is that if you sort of think about it, like, you know, for any one problem that your company might be facing, right, there are going to be more people inside the company that know about the problem than your particular team. There might be more people in the industry that know about the problem and the solution than what the team has, and then of course lots of people outside it as well. So just statistically, this sort of holds water. Then finally, our models for organizing creative effort have changed over the last 2 decades, and especially with the rise of the internet and global connectivity, this has changed quite a bit. And so you all remember this world, right? You know what this is, right? How many of you had these in your homes? Fewer than what I used to see before. Okay, these millennials, my God. Right. So Britannica, right? How many have used Britannica recently? Okay, all right. And then there was a time when we had this. Yeah, Encarta. How many used Encarta previously? Right. How many used it recently? Right. And then, of course, now, when we think about sort of knowledge in the world, we're here. So how many of you used Wikipedia in the last week? All right. Lots of people, right? So of course, on the one hand, this is a cost and distribution story, right? This was $1,000 per collection, right? Door-to-door salespeople, updated every 10 years, right? Then we went to, you could then buy, then Bill Gates said, I'm going to make knowledge more easily available, so I'm going to make it onto CDs, I'm going to sell it in Kmart and Sears, right? It's going to be $100, right? And it's annual update. And then, of course, Wikipedia shows up and it says, well, no, it's actually going to be free, right? Not $100, and it's going to be updated every second. So, from an economic point of view, this makes a lot of sense. Like a lower cost solution showed up, which has equivalent quality, right? And so then everybody went here. Makes a lot of sense. But of course, note that this is a very different production model, right? Here, right, in this world, we have people with editors asking other people to write articles, right? And they assign authority based on your credentials. Here, anybody can participate and show up and self-select. And you could just fix grammar on Wikipedia if you wanted to, right? Or do spell check if you wanted to, right? And that works in itself. And so this is a top-down model, this is a bottoms-up model. And part of what we're sort of seeing is that the bottoms-up model are emerging now in lots of different settings, right? And getting our head around that actually is the big thing. So when people talk about, well, where does crowdsourcing work? Lots of us have become used to this, but we take it now for granted. You wouldn't think about, if you were going to start an encyclopedia, that you're going to do it this way now, right? You would now think about, how am I going to have a community-driven model? Right? And so that becomes a key way to start for us to think about what's happening in our societies that's making this work. And of course, significant economic advantage, right? Encarta is dead, Britannica is dead, and what survives is Wikipedia. So back to our innovation funnel, right? What we've known from decades of studies around innovation is that generation and selection are the key factors around an innovation process. And what matters, right, so you generate ideas and you select ideas, what matters is quantity and variety of ideas. You want lots of ideas and you want lots of different ideas, right? And typically the company is the one doing all this work and we ship to customers, like we said before. And so while this is the theoretically best model for driving innovation, the reality is much more worse off, right? This is an actual development funnel from a Boston-based medical electronics company, right? And what you see, of course, is, there are silos, right? And then quality control doesn't even come into the funnel, right? For a medical electronics firm. This is a CEO drawing the funnel. And they have silos for research, customer marketing, engineering. They all go to Las Vegas, right? Something random happens, something twisty, right? Nothing gets made. Their filter is OEM. Can you OEM this thing? Can't OEM this, it doesn't get made. And then of course, I was a strategic consultant at BCG, and all the crappy ideas get put back by the consultant. I called it, right? So while this is what we want, this is what we get, and what we see are that crowds are a way for us to effectively and more cheaply drive the innovation funnel. Okay? And what we can do is we can think about crowds in two different dimensions, right? They allow us lots of volume and lots of diversity. You can organize crowds in terms of contests and competitions, right? Where the innovation problem requires a diversity of approaches, and the sponsors are not sure of what combinations of skills and approaches might be useful, right? And there's clearer rules for participation. Or you could be communities or collaboration, right? Where the innovation problem requires lots of aggregate knowledge building, and people are mixing and matching and sharing and so forth. And the governance is informal in the norm space. I started my research career here, right? Started working with Incentive and looked at this model. And in fact, what we see is that the motivation drivers that we talked about in Threadless is the same across both, right? This is just a different way to organize yourself externally. Shared IP versus exclusive IP, collective work versus individual work. We've been working at the lab to actually modulate between those two and put it together. But this is sort of the broad setup for us. The story, though, regardless, is one of what we call extreme values. You've heard us talk about this before, right? And so again, I just want to remind you of statistics, right? Any process that happens in the world can be modeled through a probability distribution, through some kind of a statistical distribution. And what you start to say, and this is a Gaussian, a normal distribution, right? And if you remember what your stats professor taught you, is that if you do something once, you'll just get the average outcome, right? But if you do it multiple independent times, you can get the extreme value, right? So if you think about a company is going to do something once, has one team working on a problem, right? They'll just get the average value. Why we see clouds are effective beyond just the cost function, you're only paying for performance, right, is the fact that we get multiple independent solutions across the distribution and we can pick up the extreme value. And so, you know, the nickname for our lab is the Extreme Value Innovation Lab. What does that stand for? Evil. Evil, yeah. So we have evil stickers for you. Right? Don't tell the dean. Right? It's going to be our secret. It's a nerd, and this is an actual, this is Magnetti's distribution, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is actual.
Our research science.
Yeah. So anyway, again, so because we get lots of volume emerging in communities and in contests, we can rely on getting extreme values at scale. And this results in great performance. And so what we've seen is that, again, historically, collaborative crowds have been around forever, right, in a range of disciplines, from Bessemer steel production, to silk production, to Cornish pumping engines, and this notion of collective invention has been at the heart of industrial progress, right? Part of the Industrial Revolution required this to happen, and certainly now, today, we take Linux for granted, we take open source for granted. That's become part of our establishment, right? And we don't bat an eye. 1997, when I started looking at open source, people were like, this is not going to work, this can't scale, this is a flash in the pan. Today, we just take it for granted. Similarly, I think what's interesting to me is Apple. Apple is an unsung exploiter as well as contributor to open source, right? Apple, close to 40% of OS 10 and iOS runs on open source. So here's a company that has figured out how to act, and they say it openly, right? They figured out how to actually work with communities, share IP with them, and yet become one of the most profitable and one of the most highly valued companies in the world, right? With open source. So when people say, you know, I'm my special snowflake company, right? We don't share IP, right? It's going to be taken away from us. It's like, if these guys can figure it out, surely one of the most secretive companies can figure it out. Certainly, all the companies can also figure this out as well. And then, of course, contests have been, again, around for a long time. The beautiful dome in Florence was done through a contest. Food canning, you know, if you opened up a can of food in the last week, you have a contest to thank. And we talked about the launch prize. And then when I started looking at these things, you know, X Prize was becoming big, and the Space Travel Prize, Netflix Prize was big, and then Local Motors and car design emerged as well as interesting things. Let me actually show you, not this one, because we've seen this before.
Just go forward, Karim.
I'm going to just show this one, yes.
Yeah.
Let me show you the most recent example of us trying to tell the Harvard community that Joy's Law doesn't apply to Harvard. We actually had a grant, thanks to Mike Stebbins and the Arnold Foundation, to design contests around healthcare. And we took a relatively easy problem of identifying lung cancer tumors and segmenting the lung cancer tumors from X-rays and from CT scans. And the idea was, can we create AI algorithms that can automatically outline lung cancer tumors? This is like a task for highly skilled radiation oncologists. They go voxel by voxel and create the solutions. The idea was, can we compare ourselves to the average radiation oncologist, right, and existing automated tools. So we spent about $55,000 in contests in 3 phases over 8 weeks, 34 participants over these contests, and 588 solutions came through. And what we discovered here was something pretty remarkable. So MM1 and MM2, MIM1 and MIM2 are the commercial solutions that are out there. And just in the first phase, our top solutions were approaching the commercial solutions. The benchmark for us was not just the commercial solution, but how well are the radiation oncologists doing? And what we show you here is the inner observation average, right? So there's heterogeneity amongst oncologists. Like, you will segment a tumor one way, somebody else will segment it a slightly different way. So we take a whole bunch of radiation oncologists, get them to segment the same tumors, and get their average, right? So this is the sort of the inner observer average. And what we got was basically, again, remember 8 weeks, $55,000. We're able to, by working the contests, and we actually did sort of closed and open. We would share, people would work on their own initially, then we'd share the best solutions, then they would take that and go work on their own again. What we discovered is that in 8 weeks of work, we could get to as good as the average radiation oncologist at Harvard. Remember, these are guys that have 15 years of medical school training, right? And now we can provide this through an AI solution this way, right? And we went through these phases, and phase 3 is basically an ensemble approach of a bunch of different algorithms together. Right? So this is remarkable that we can actually now use the contest to generate this AI solution and put this all together for us. So people will say, surely Harvard is smarter than the crowd on average. It's true. Like, our distribution is probably right-shifted, right? And the crowd distribution could be left-shifted, right? But remember, even if I am right-shifted, I'm still going to get the average solution from Harvard versus getting all the solutions from the crowd, right? And I get to pick on the extreme value solution, Harvard gets to pick on the average solution. And so that is the difference between these two things. And that's what I want to leave you with, right? Which is to say, the framework, a very simplistic framework as to understanding how markets work, how crowds work, both in communities and contests, is to say, distributionally, we just get more shots on goal. By getting more shots on goal, right, we can find extreme values. Extreme values help us outperform most elite institutions. And our record at the lab the last 7 years has been to show problem after problem, right, compared to elite institutions, Harvard, MIT, Harvard Medical School, Scripps Research Institute, Pfizer, you name it, that we can organize the crowd in a way to get the extreme value, right? And there's a lot of other things going on that we've talked about in the case, but this is at the core of what we see. So part of the language we want folks to go away with is this notion of explaining to people extreme values and why it's important for innovation, and then also how to get that effectively achieved. Okay, with that I'll stop, and then are we going to have a break again?
Yeah, another quick break,
Yeah.
and then we'll get right started with getting started.
So let's get back at 11:40.
This is going to be great.
Okay, and then we'll start with our panels.